challenges. But before I go into those big challenges, we have a host of people who have done things and important things. And the first person is Emma Bridgewater, who not only produces beautiful mugs, but she actually comes and mixes with mugs. But she is president of the CPRE, and I have to say that she is an extremely sensible woman. And how do I know that? It's because we agree about so many things. Emma Bridgewater.
Thank you, Robin. I'm so relieved we weren't talking about jugs. I've no real idea why you asked me to talk and what I can possibly add, but I thought about you, and I thought about the CRT and my role at the CPRE. And I'm just going to start from there. I'll share some thoughts with you and hope it's vaguely useful. Before I became president of the CPRE, I'm ashamed to admit that I knew next to nothing about that organisation. If you're not already members, and I know some of you are, for which thank you, do please join up. At the time, I wasn't a member, and I thought it was something pretty niche. I vaguely imagined its members and council to be Tweedy planning specialists who got worked up about wind farms. What an idiot I am. Their brownfield first policy was a revelation. They patiently explained to me that we must continue to press our councils to build out all remotely suitable, messed up, previously developed land before 1 inch of greenbelt could be considered for development. And thus, whilst fiercely protecting our countryside, we're simultaneously regenerating tired cities. Well, because of my working life in Stoke-on-Trent, a particularly battered city in need of regeneration, this resonated for me and I was in. The brownfield first policy is still a work in progress, but I love the practicality and the sense in that policy, and it is entirely characteristic of the organisation. This attitude opened my eyes to the thoughtful nature of this pragmatic and resourceful organisation. 91 years of uphill lobbying have seasoned the CPRE into a fierce force to be reckoned with. We may have virtually no legal weapons to hand in the fight for conservation, thanks to the endless tinkering with our planning laws by successive governments, who have far too often and too cravenly bowed to the pressure from the business community, developers in particular. I'll simply say bonus and mention £25 million and leave that rather awful topic. I think you all know what I'm talking about, and it makes me feel completely furious. Anyway, like a trusty pack of keen beagles after an apparently impossibly nimble hare, the CPRE sticks to its plan. Recently, I was at a housing conference, and in a room full of architects, the word went round that someone from the CPRE is here. Oh, Christ, I hate those guys. They can really mess up a nice, simple planning application. Which one is the bastard? Said the charming man beside me, a new friend I had thought. I was nervous, but also quietly proud as I announced myself to him and said that I hoped we'd continue to chuck tax under his tires if he was taking liberties with the Greenbelt. For the CPRE is committed to protecting our fragile and finite countryside. We share so many of Robin's ideals. But we are not against sort of all kinds of change and all kinds of development. For us, it's all about the right houses in the right places. We utterly respect and promote the fundamental human need for decent housing, but that housing must be part of functional, workable, livable communities with infrastructure. For unless it connects readily with schools, doctor surgeries, pubs, churches, shops, and all the things we need every day, then that lonely, isolated commuter dormitory will be generating far more problems than it's solving. Now, in my thoughtless ignorance, for a long time, I hung on to a sort of pervasive, rather desperate impression, one that I fear quite a lot of us share, probably not present company. Namely, that conservation might be a bit of a luxury, an optional bolt-on, something to think about later when I'm not so very busy. And some of the issues seemed hard to get in a flap about. Take litter. Of course, I'd always hated it. I taught my children that the only thing you could ever chuck into a hedge is an apple core. And I learnt from my own mum the habit of picking up litter on the way to and from the shops. And it annoyed my own children just as much as it had always annoyed me when I was little. But it never seemed worth getting up ahead of steam on the subject. It was just something to quietly get on with, wasn't it? The CPRE has always been much, much wiser and well aware of the deeper problem posed. And we've campaigned almost since we began to raise awareness of the need to keep fighting what is, of course, a true scourge, a real big black blot on the landscape, as we all learned with horror whilst watching David Attenborough's masterly Blue Planet and seeing the devastation that litter, plastic litter in particular, is causing. It's everywhere, but much of it ends up in the oceans where it forms vast, toxic, hideous, awfully depressing archipelagos. For it turns out that plastic litter is worse than ugly, it's sinister, and it's a threat to our health as it breaks down into ever tinier particles, killing wildlife, permeating entire ecosystems, with still unknowable but definitely destructive effects long term. Having played a leading role in the beautifully simple and gloriously successful campaign to outlaw plastic shopping bags, the CPRE scored another litter-busting victory this summer when Michael Gove, him again, bowed to the campaign for a bottle deposit return system. That's another crusade of the CPRE inspired by my predecessor at the CPRE, Bill Bryson. I stand in very illustrious shoes. Immediately before me was Andrew Motion. Anyway, Bill Bryson impressed all with the description of how a deposit return scheme had been operating for years in his home state of Iowa. And when you come to think about it, there's nothing new about it. We used to do it here. My brother and I used to collect bottles on the campsite when we were on holiday in Cornwall and use them to buy more sweets. And we could take them in to the shop, get the money, and invest it in curly whirlies. Seemed like a good thing to me. And of course, that legislation is still to come. I'm sure Zach will sort it out. But there was such an exciting feeling at the time that sense might, it felt like a brief moment of real common sense in politics, because from the outside, it doesn't always feel like that. Now, this week, in time to set the scene for this gathering, we heard from the World Wildlife Fund the grim tally of species loss. Extinctions are becoming extinct at an escalating pace as we pillage the planet, raiding wild places for their valuable natural resources, timber, minerals, and the rest, without any proper consideration for the destruction left when the bulldozers trundle away. Animal and plant species in countless numbers are disappearing into oblivion as we greedily grub up, consume, and throw away our natural resources as if they were infinite and inexhaustible. 50% of species lost in 50 years. It's just such an appalling, terrible thought that, in my adult lifetime. Green fields and farmland tended over centuries are lost to urban sprawl and ever-growing transport schemes. It's as if we haven't noticed every day that the more road we build, the more cars come out and clog up that road. We plug on as if we don't care what we're losing and what complex effects we'll feel from these losses, as if we can't hear, smell, and see the blight of destruction in the fields all around us. This summer, there was all the awful, awful news about the bee populations of the world declining, which would cause widespread crop failure if we continue to kill off the pollinating insects. It's just such a horrible illustration of the dangers that we are moving so fast towards if we fail to recognize and protect the beautiful, delicate balance of the ecosystems which support us here. Now, not long ago, Robin invited me to visit him at Barton. We walked around the farm. It was immediately clear to me, as of course you all know, that he is one of the great heroes of our time, just as Zach said. I'd read and enjoyed his controversial journalism, so I knew him to be outspoken and passionate, but in his own natural habitat, I could see how thoroughly he lives by his beliefs that we must respect and look after the natural world. The Countryside Trust is the real thing. The Countryside Restoration Trust is the real thing. And actually, one of the things we say at the CPRE is when it's gone, and you can't get it back. I think one of the first great things that Robin shows is actually you can take some pretty messed up land and make something utterly, utterly beautiful and right. we all need to realise fully and to try much harder to find and live our own version of his consistency, honesty, and his life of dedication to conservation. We just can't carry on as if someone else is going to come in and sort out this unholy mess. It's up to us, and we've got to do something about it right now. We need to become completely focused on conserving the beautiful natural world, upon which our safety, our sanity, and the future of our children depend. Okay, so far, so Twitter, so completely normal for now, anxious ranting and a feeling of powerlessness and futility, which can be overwhelming. We all know all this stuff. And when we feel overwhelmed, we give up. And the figures, the grim facts bear out that we are losing at the moment. We feel anguished that it seems as if nothing is happening in Westminster. From the outside, the appearance is that these issues are simply not being tackled. We bang our fists down and we grow exasperated that politicians don't seem to be doing anything sensible to curtail us. Instead, it seems they're keeping busy measuring up a lorry park from Dover to the M25. And meanwhile, horrible news I learnt recently, businesses are haggling over the last warehouse space left along the coasts of France and Belgium in which to stockpile goods before the last boat sails. But the Countryside Restoration Trust is a beacon to us, and there is a way out of the mess. This is what's occurred to me thinking about this event. Of course, we want to and we long to see sensible legislation reassuring us that government shares our concerns and is stepping forward with strong and practical legislation. Of course, we want a real tangible wake-up in Westminster. But what if we stop squeaking and waving our fists and take a deep breath and assume that that isn't going to happen? Our politics don't seem to be able to tackle the real issues. We're just living a sort of distraction all the time. So what can we do? What if we look about ourselves and take on board that we've done a fateful thing? We've created a market-led economy where intervention from government isn't what happens. So far, personally, I think we've been travelling in hope, wanting to believe that if we generate economic growth, we'll go on and on some magic out-of-reach day in the future, miraculously, we'll discover that we've made enough money to buy the solutions to all the terrible problems we've created. This makes me feel confused, overwhelmed, and appalled. And after all, I've been a busy part of this pattern of consumer activity, but I think that a solution is right in the midst of the conundrum of capitalism because we're the market. We are infinitely powerful as individual consumers. Isn't it just as simple as that? We need to stop buying the products and services which we believe to be irresponsibly produced. And then those irresponsible producers will have to change their ways. Selfish greed isn't any good. In fact, it's completely unacceptable. It's time to reconnect with our humanity and do what we all long to do at heart, namely to see ourselves as a local community within a huge, connected global community, all committed to looking after each other and our world. And that starts with the decision, each individual decision, to do your best, to take responsibility for your own habits as a consumer. That's it. Just take yourself in hand. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm questioning my ingrained assumptions and connecting with what I really know, want, and love. Because if we were to stop buying, say, plastic, then the oil industry would have to stop pumping it into the world. And then they'd have to start dealing with their dirty habits, surely. It's a powerful thought. Admit it. It hasn't been difficult to live without plastic shopping bags, has it? I mean, you think about the fuss and the resistance. But if we could have all just simply decided to be sensible, like our mums, like our grannies, and take a basket to the shops. We could have decided that for ourselves. And we can keep pushing ourselves to, it's simple, consume less trash. I know this is, in practice, complicated and demanding, but if we keep a hold of the simple face of the problem as it actually challenges us every day, namely to keep on reminding ourselves to adapt and change our habits, I think it can be done. And the trick for me lies in understanding the dizzying power that lies in that decision to wrap your sandwiches in greaseproof paper rather than a plastic bag and take it from there. Singly, it can feel a bit forlorn, a tiny bit heroic. But if we all took this route, it would be immensely powerful. we all know that the food movement is starting to make huge differences. It changes how the supermarkets behave. We need to just go on much deeper into all that behaviour. And if we could each do our frugal bit for food waste, in my case by channeling my grandparents to whom wastefulness was unthinkable, well, that could change the whole picture. I'm sure you've read the shocking figures recently estimating that 40 or even 50% of all the food produced ends up in the bins. Our wastefulness alone is doing so much harm. If we take the blindfold off our common sense when clothes shopping, we can face up to the fact that a t-shirt doesn't actually cost £1, even if the chain store says that it does. You can simply be sure that someone else is subsidising this cheap price with exploitative labour prices, and no need to worry what they're flushing down the rivers or wafting up the chimneys. At this point, I'm going to run a very quick commercial for British produce. Brace yourselves. I ask you to think about manufacturers in this country who conform to the mostly sensible and effective labour and environmental laws, which do much to curb bad practice. You're paying the true price if you buy a shirt made in the UK, and that is still possible. You can choose to buy something decent and look after it. Moreover, British businesses supporting local communities in many ways around the central fact of making jobs. Business can and should always should always question the accepted wisdom about what they might do next and what sort of responsibility they want to take on. On the flip side of that thought, as a society, we can have precisely the type of products and attitude in business that we wish to find simply by supporting businesses whose sustainable practices we applaud. Personally, for example, I'm dreading the employment changes that artificial intelligence may bring. But I remind myself I'm not compelled to join in. I can continue to staff my warehouse with people. It's a choice. We've got huge, endless agency, and we can use that choice much better. I think I'm well over time, so I'm just going to say that the Countryside Restoration Trust says it clearly and lives the life that creates the change that we so badly need. And Gandhi said it so brilliantly when he said it for all of us: be the change that you want to see. Thank you.